Hey guys, and finally welcome to the AMD Ryzen Threadripper 1950X and the Asus Zenith Extreme motherboard review. So we finally get a chance to talk about Threadripper, and yes, there is a lot of results and testing coming later, but there is also a lot of overclocking and that sort of stuff coming later as well. Done quite a bit of toing and froing with thermals and playing around and trying to get things running as quick as I possibly can do. We can finally talk about all the stuff which has pretty much been leaked online already anyway. So the long and short of it is 16 cores in the 1950X and 12 cores in the 1920X. We are hearing already though, thanks to some convenient leaks online, that there may be a non-X variant coming later on that will probably lose the XFR like it did with the other Ryzen processors. Now, with the CPUs themselves, they've both got quite a high TDP of 180 watts. And weirdly, AMD did even say in their own PDF that they sent out to the reviewers that Threadripper was recommended and designed to be run with water cooling, so an AIO at very least. Now, we do know that there are going to be some air coolers coming later on from Noctua and Cooler Master. But with that kind of hint from AMD, we're going to have to see how they perform. Now, I do have the Noctua ones coming in, and I will try and get some results and details to you as quickly as I possibly can do. But obviously, I have to do this for NDA, so we're actually filming almost a week in advance. Actually, no, it's Sunday, so it's like 5 days in advance. It's not a big deal anyway. So you get 4+4 on one die and then 4+4 on the other die. Now basically with Threadripper, if you were to take the big massive CPU top off, there are actually 4 dies underneath, because it's essentially an EPIC, but they've just turned a couple of dies off, or at least that's the idiot's way of explaining it. So they're going to do that with 4+4 on one and then 4+4 on the other. That 4+4 is pretty much just like a scalable kind of version of Ryzen. So each of those little dies are kind of Ryzen, because right from the very beginning with Ryzen, it was designed to be scalable. So this isn't them, it's kind of an aggressive way where it has been said they are kind of like super glued together, but that was the way it was designed from the start, in that they could take the cores and scale them up to bigger products with more cores and more threads. And so that's where they were going from. It's not been an afterthought, it was the way it was meant to be all along. So essentially with the product that I've got behind me, you've only got access to 16 cores and 32 threads, although with the way that the multi-threading works, or SMT, which is what they're calling it, it's essentially putting 2 tasks into 1 core, and it just allows you to get a little bit more out of it. But 16 cores isn't an awful lot, but there are more of them hidden. Now, we don't know at this present moment in time whether you may be able to, you know, trick them into all coming to life or something like that. But when I talk to you about the overclocking later, having lots of cores on there may end up being detrimental to overclocking. And also, one of the things that they do with speed binning is they're out of the cores that are on the die, one of them might be totally fudged, and that's why it's had that module turned off. So there are lots of ways like this with speed binning, which is how they manage to produce this stuff. Pick out the right ones and kind of put them in the right places. Oh, that's good enough for that product, that's good enough for that product, and that actually helps them keep the bottom line down a little bit. Now, I know the bottom line down a little bit seems a bit extreme when you're talking about £1,000 processor, but these things, it's not the cost of manufacturing them so much, it's the cost of the R&D and everything that goes into it to even get them to the point of even starting to look at manufacturing stuff. And it's something that a lot of people seem to skim over and forget in their fanboy fuel rants. But anyway, so The 1950X has a base frequency of 3.4 gigahertz and an all-cores boost frequency of 3.7 gigahertz, and the 1920X is 3.5 and 3.7. The base frequency, well, it says the all-core frequency of 3.7, but if you really ramp the if you really ramp the stress up on these and they start to get warm, you can find it will actually go back to just the base frequency rather than that 3.7 all cores. But the thing is you've got a up to 4 gigahertz for 4 cores boost frequency, and then up to 4.2 gigahertz XFR on 4 cores as well. So you can have up to 4 cores going up to 4.2 gigahertz. And I can say that over the time that I've been testing mine, I have seen 4.2 gigahertz quite a lot. Now, when this comes to overclocking, it does get kind of complicated, because as I will kind of give you more details on later on, I couldn't overclock all the cores to 4.2 gigahertz. But again, you need to think about the fact there are a lot of the cores and you only need one of them to not be able to go as high, and that if you're going to go for all of them running at the same speed, then you're going to have to reduce them all to that weak core. Or you can spend an age in Ryzen Master. I think they're going to have a new one called Ryzen Master 2 or Threadripper Master. I don't know what they're going to call it. But anyway, you could go into that and find the weak core and only have that weak core running a little bit lower. But it's going to take you quite a bit of time to go through each core individually, finding out which one the weak one is. But that is an option if you're pedantic enough, and when I get the software, it's probably going to be something that I'm going to do. And when I say when I get the software, because even though it's the Sunday before NDA, I've still not seen it. So I've done all of my stuff in the BIOS, kind of the old school way. I tend not to use the softwares anyway, but it will be something I will explore. It's just, like I said, it's sadly something that I've not been able to get to. And in case you're wondering, why are you filming so early then? Well, I do have to get stuff done, and I have actually got some pre-booked engagements that I need to go and do next week. But you will still get the review on time, and that's why I'm making sure I've done it on time. The diary juggling has been immense. So, and then you have 64 Pci Express Lanes. Those 64 Pci Express Lanes is kind of insane. But when we can look at the way that the 64 Pci Express Lanes get kind of split out. But one thing I will say straight off the bat is that you do need to keep in mind that they do save 4 of the Pci Express lanes for the chipset. And on note C, you can see 4 lanes are reserved for the X399 chipset. You can also see at the top there are 2 general purpose PCI Express 3 Gen 3 lanes actually on the chipset itself, because on the chipset they have their own PCI Express 3 lanes. I know that we're going 4-2, so the 4 reserved for the chipset go from the CPU to the chipset. The 2 on the chipset are actually on the chipset themselves, so they can be used, as it says here, for extra SATA or extra SATA Express. And then on note B, you can see that there's also some Gen 2 lanes that they can use for Ethernet, LAN, Bluetooth, and other sort of stuff like that. But the bit that we really want to look at is the PCI Express configurations, because there are so many PCI Express lanes it can be configured in quite a different way. In the fact, if you have a look, you could have 3 16 times graphics cards in there, and then you could still have 4 NVMe M.2 drives. So I mean, that in itself, I mean, you can see the breakdown there. So you've got quite a lot of ways that you can swing and roundabouts, and it's all kind of self-addressable, and it sorts itself out. But when we come back to talking about the CPU itself, you can see here this is just a basic diagram of the way it's laid out, and you've got the little kind of figure of 8 is the Infinity fabric. Now with the Infinity fabric, this is exactly the same sort of thing that they use with Ryzen, so they're just scaling it up that little bit more to give you more cores. Now obviously if this was Epic, you would probably end up having another one to the side of it with a couple of more Infinity fabric connections. Now something that we did find out was with the Infinity fabric, it does tend to work a bit better with faster DRAM, so faster RAM, the little clip-in memory sticks that you get that go on the board. Now, we have played around with the memory on this, and we yet again found a kind of really nice level point of being 3200 megahertz. We tried lots of 3200 megahertz kits, and they all worked, you know, just with the DOCP and turning them on. We didn't have to mess around with it too much. But then once you go above that 3200 megahertz point, sometimes that can be the tripping point, and it can need a bit more manual intervention. So if you're a beginner, then 3200 megahertz is a good place to stop. You don't have to run 3200 megahertz. If you need to save some money, you can buy some cheaper ones. But if you are more of a hands-on person, you know your way around the BIOS, you know how to go in there and change volts and, you know, mess around and play around, you may need to be able to get more running. We did get 3466 running, but really 3333 was a nice place that we could go in and get it running relatively easily. 3466 needed a bit of sort of like fiddling and juggling with volts and stuff. 3600 wasn't easily accessible for us on this one, but that may come with new drivers, and we had all the Agisa updates that come with Ryzen before, so that may happen with this, but only time is going to tell. Now, we do need to spend some time looking at the board, because at the end of the day, Asus have pretty much brought out their flagship board pretty much straight off the bat, because it's got that extreme nomenclature on it. Now, that's a pretty big thing, because if you think about the fact that we've still not even seen a Rampage Extreme yet, this is out for launch. So it kind of does go a little way to show how Asus finally starting to wake up. And I say finally because I don't think that they really took Ryzen seriously enough. But they have worked up, they have properly made some big changes, and they've made some good changes as well in their BIOS and the way things have been working. And I think really when you see this, you're going to understand what I'm on about. Okay then, so first things first, we've got the heat sink at the top for the VRMs. Now, a lot of people have said that they didn't think that the PWMs, that there was enough of them. Now, I have tested these poor little blighters to death, and I have managed to get 691 watts being pulled from the wall, which probably meant that I had probably about 550 watts going through these. And the combination of the heatsink with the extra heat pipe and what's hiding underneath here, they really didn't get hot at all. So look for that later on in the review. So underneath the rear I/O shield, you can see this kind of old school looking heatsink. But at the end of the day, the surface area on this heatsink, because of all those old school looking fins, is actually really good. Now, there is a fan underneath which you can see pulls through on those. Now, they do say it's temperature controlled, but I've not really seen a great deal of variation between the RPMs on it. But thankfully, you can turn it off entirely in the BIOS. To be honest with you, even with the overclocking side of it, I didn't particularly feel that it was that needed. Now, because things weren't getting ridiculously hot. And I did run some of my overclock tests without the fan on, and I would have been happy to have run it like that anyway. But there's quite a lot of material there that you can see. Now, a lot of people might not like the fan. I'd probably be one of the people that ended up removing it altogether and then putting my heatsink back on like that, if I'm honest. But you can't really get away with just taking the heatsink off, because you do have the screen here. So if you were to remove the I/O cover, I have heard people saying about doing it, then you would lose this. I suppose you could then make a project out of trying to change it and put it somewhere else. Other things around the board, you do get this M.2 add-in card. It doesn't come with the M.2, I've just got it there because I've been using, that's the drive I've been using for my OS. But it also shows you how they mount. Now, you've got one mounted on this side, and you can have another one mounted on this side. There is also another one nestled underneath the chipset heatsink here. And when you remove it, you can see that there is a thermal pad on this side, and this is where the lights come through. but you've got your section here with the RGBs on it, which light up all nice. But this is where your M.2 can mount. Now this M.2 goes up to 2280, or the 80mm ones. Now the one further up goes up to 110mm, although I've not seen any 110mm M.2s be released yet. Now when we come to the top right hand corner of the board, there are two 8-pin power connections up there. Now you can just connect one, but it does come up with a little flash, like a pop-up on the screen when you only have one connected, and it does prompt you to plug in the second. So if you are going to get one of these, you're going to need to make sure that your power supply has 2 times 8-pin EPS power supply connectors, or 8-pin EPS CPU connectors. Most half decent power supplies do now, but as you'll see later on, with the amount of watts that you can pull from this just with the CPU benchmark, you probably are going to need about 1000 watts if you're going to get yourself a decent graphics card as well. So some pretty big numbers there. Now also what we can see is when we come down, we have the start and the reset button. You've got these little dip switches here which allow you to turn the Pci Express 16 lanes on the motherboard off. That can come in handy if you've got a lot of them, you know, with like dice pots on or water cooled or something. It helps you be able to find out which one of them is faulty. Now there are some fan headers up here. You've got 2. But you do also have a water block sensor up here, and Bits Power and EK are working on full cover water blocks for the board. You do get the top RGB pin here. There is 2 more down the bottom. Now you've got the 4-pin one there and the 3-pin one there, because there is a pin missing. That is an addressable RGB port. Now you can get addressable RGB kits now, which are kind of handy. Bits Power are one of the companies that are making them, and basically when it's addressable, it means that, for argument's sake, you can they change color independently, and you can also have them on half light, and then one specifically can flash. We can have like starry patterns. So there's much more that you can do with these, which is kind of mental when you think about the fact there are less pins on it, but that you can do more with it. But anyway, so further down the side, you've got horizontal USB 3 there. There is another vertical one there. You can see that we've got 6 SATAs, a U.2 connector. You've got the water cooling zone here down the bottom. So you've got the water flow, water pump. This water pump header is actually quite good if you're overclocking and you need to connect a fan, because this will natively just run at 100%. So 12 volts, so you can keep that. You've also got thermal sensor header. You've got water in and water out temperature header as well. Slow mode, safe boot. You can save a safe profile to the BIOS, and if you hit this, it will just boot up at that. Retry button, it's like reset but without all the annoying stuff where you get the Windows thing popping up saying do you want to check your system for faults and all that sort of thing. So this is a way of getting around that annoying hang up. Technically you don't have a USB 2 because you've got this ROG extension here, but that is a USB 2 connector if you need one. Now options for this are you can get a USB 3 that comes from this to 2 internal USB 2 headers, and you can do it that way to add a couple in, or you can just use this ROG extension one and then run an internal hub, because you can get hubs from like the likes of NZXT, and they're easily got for, you know, sort of like about £10. You do get an extra power header here for if you were to be running like 4 graphics cards. But to be honest with you, if you were to be running 4 graphics cards, then I would probably say that you were running like Quadros or Fire Pros or something like that. Something else that I did want to cover as well, as you've now seen, it's come off. Well, no, it's not come off, I took it off. Now, the thing is with this, is it is an applicator tool so that you can fit the CPU, but the CPU is very big and it's very heavy, and it could be daunting for a new user to fit. So AMD have done it this way so that there is a way to stop people being so scared about the big CPU, but you don't have to run it. It doesn't make any difference. I've done temperature testing with and without, just to make sure, and it makes no difference. It's all it really does is hold on to the CPU with the 6 clips here and allow you to slide it down into the bracket before you bolt it in. But without it, you just have to go a little bit more carefully about how you place the CPU down. And I'll be honest with you, it is big and there is quite a bit of weight to it. So you do have to be careful about it, but you can do it without. So that's the reason why I took mine out. And I did check all of this information with AMD as well, and it has been confirmed. This is basically for, when you think about it, going out into the mass market with people that are going to be building their own PCs. This is to try and stop boards being wrecked by people dropping a heavy CPU into the pins and bending the pins. And let's face it, there are 4,096 pins underneath this CPU, so getting it in the right position, or at least not dropping the corner of a large bit of silicon in it, is quite important. Now they do say that another reason for this is so that the CPU can't move. But when I fitted mine, I'm not saying this is how you should fit yours. I did mine that way round. I didn't try and lay it in or anything like that. And you just get it in the right place, drop the pads down, and then just do the screws up like you would a car wheel, really. But it was daunting for me to do it without. But like I said, I wanted to test with it and without it. So it's completely up to you. But just keep in mind, please do keep in mind that if you do take this off and you drop your CPU in and you bend the pins, there is a great deal of chance that they might not hold your warranty. Now obviously I don't particularly get that issue because I don't get any warranty anyway. But anyway, so one of the things that come with the board that are kind of cool, there is a 10 GBE Ethernet card. Now, there's always someone that will pipe up, and there will be anyway, that'll say, will it make my internet faster? And it won't. It won't. This works after your modem or your router. It's about your internal network. Now, if this is 10 GBE, everything that it connects to needs to be 10 GBE as well. So for argument's sake, I run 10 GBE in my own rig and my home server, but because they go through a switch, I have to have a 10 GBE switch. So if you were to plug this connection into the back of your router, and the back of your router was only gigabit, then it will only connect as gigabit. It can also come down to cable quality as well, because I run full-blown Cat 7s. So this is a very Gucci and quite an expensive add-on, if I'm honest. But the reason why they've done it, because a lot of people will be like, I don't care about that, I just want to play my games. To be honest with you, if you need 16 cores and 32 threads, it's highly likely that you're going to have large amounts of data to move around a network as well. And if you get this, I mean, you can pick up 10 GB cards as well to add into your server and stuff. And I've only got an Asus. It's 10 ports in total, but 2 of them are 10 GBE, and it was £200. Or was it $300? I can't remember. I got it from the States. Anyway, I imported it because Asus aren't selling it over here yet. But anyway, so there are ways that you can jump on this bandwagon. Now, this card, across my network, 1.1 gigabits a second. Absolutely monstrous amounts of data. And gigabytes a second, because I get 110, 115 gigabytes a second transfers with gigabit normally. But this absolutely it's just rapid. Let's face it, 110 up to 1,000, 1,100 basically. So yeah, you can certainly move your files around really quickly. Now, I have done a preview of this board already, which I'll put a link to underneath and above. But one of the other cool things that it comes with is a GPU support. This comes in the box, which is all cool and lovely. And the driver CD isn't a driver CD. It comes on a memory stick. Finally, it's awesome. And then one of the only other things that comes with it, which is cool but sad at the same time, is a ROG sticker. But it's a big plasticky one. They used to come red, but now they're silver because we're trying to go with like nice colours. Now, obviously you can. It's up to you where you put it, but I'm not one of those people that has all the stickers lined up on my on my case. So I try and find somewhere subtle and nice to put it. I don't know, maybe put it on your back of your phone or something. So there's a lot going on with the board. They really have gone to town with it. And like I said to you before, this cooling thing is literally straight off the Rampage Extreme, which we've not even seen yet. But like I said, when we get to later on, the fact that I've had a lot of watts being pulled through this, it doesn't get hot. It does its job very well. The only other cool bit, which I've just remembered, which I really should cover, is the fact that it has the I/O shield built into the back, so you don't have to fit anything, just go straight into your case. You've got a few vents there for where the fan is. Quite a lot of quite a lot of USBs. This is gigabit Ethernet here. You have to do the add-in card if you want to run the 10 GBE. You could even be running more than one network connection and have like private network set up if you're that way inclined. Around the back of the board, you've got this back plate here, kind of brace, but really all that is doing, if I'm honest, is the attachment. Now you can see that thin plastic line down there, that's some more RGBs. You obviously don't have to have them on, but they all change colour and stuff. And that's really all this section is doing. They say it's a brace to help with graphics cards, but to be honest with you, if you wanted a brace to help with graphics cards, it would be there. The other thing that it does have around the back is you've got the massive TR4, or they're calling it the Backplate SP3. You've got that massive Backplate X section there, but you've also got a backplate on the VRMs. There is some thermal pad there as well, and it's quite a thick backplate as well. But it's probably giving quite a nice bit of bracing, but then also some a heat sink really to help keep the back of the board that little bit cooler as well. So as far as a board for launch is concerned, it's pretty epic. Okay then, so on to the juicy bits. It's the kind of exciting bit that we're all waiting for as well. Now first things first, there are going to be a lot more tests and more stuff going on the OC3D website. So if you are interested, click the card, click the link underneath, go and have a look. That's where all of the other graphs are. I'm just giving you the highlights here. So the rig itself, it's a bit of a kind of Frankenstein at the moment, and I will explain why and then we'll see the results in a minute. So the stock test all went through kind of lovely, and if you looked at my preview video of the motherboard, you may have seen that it was showing a 50 degrees CPU temperature. That was at idle, but there's another one of those not very nice. I was going to use the G word, but I won't be nasty or, you know, unkind. Won't use that phrase. Anyway, so it's got a 20 degrees offset, so it was technically sat there at 30 degrees, which is about right. Now, there are two temperatures. We use hardware info most of the time because it does give us a lot of information. It does mean that we can keep an eye on the VRMs, and it does mean that we can keep an eye on two of the CPU temperatures. Now, AMD told me to keep an eye on this, the T die, so the temperature for the die, but there's another one as well called the TCTL. Now, when I was doing my testing and going around with thermal probes and my infrared laser thermometer, I did kind of start to assume that that was going to mean something to do with the socket. And the reason why was that was the hottest part of the board. There's you got the backplate on the back of the CPU. That was red hot, especially when overclocking, and I mean properly hot. And if you were to put your finger around the outside of the CPU cooler, so on like the metal bracket holds the CPU down, that was incredibly hot. Now, don't get me wrong, CPUs will make them warm and you can feel a difference, but it was really hot. So in the end, when I was doing my overclocking, I thought I was starting to get into temperature issues. Now, I always use the trusty, either the H115 Corsair unit, which is an Asetek cooler, or I use a H110. Now, I'd normally use the H110, but that's got a different mount on it, and I needed to be able to use the Asetek mount that comes with the CPUs, so that's why I went and got the 115 out of the loft. I did wonder whether this wasn't man enough for the job though when I come to do my overclocking, so I moved on to the Fractal Celsius S36. Again, it's made by Acetec, so I could get the bracket on. So I put that on, and I use Corsair ML fans. So I went from 240s up to 3 120s, 100% fans, absolutely blasting. Pump all turned up to max, and then I was still seeing that very hot CTL temperature. So then what I ended up doing was putting a fan on top of the graphics card with a bit of insulating putty from the old Sub-Zero days, blowing at the socket, and then I had another fan around the back blowing at the back of the motherboard onto that, and believe it or not, that TCTL temperature then come down about 15 degrees. With those two things in play and my air conditioning blowing frost, I did manage to get a 4 GHz overclock across all of the cores at 1.42 volts, 100% stable. But I did need to have everything, to the point where my air conditioning does like a cycle. It will get to a certain point, gets down to about 17 degrees, and then it will turn off because of a thermal based thing, and then it will kick in, and there can be like a few minutes between it going, you know, onto normal, just blowing air out, and the cold coming in again. But the problem is where the rig was situated, when the air conditioning kind of went through that cycle, because it, you know, the room had got to a cold enough point, the rig was then able to warm up just that little bit too much, and it would fall over. So I ended up having to literally just tell my aircon to just blast frost continuously. But I think at the end of the day, what it is, and we will talk about this, it is very temperature sensitive, and I think that's why they've put that 20-degree offset on there as well. But we do need to remember that I was doing a massive overclock. Now, I've not been able to talk to any other reviewers yet because I'm making this video quite ahead of time. So I don't know whether I've got a really good overclock or not with that 4 GHz. I know that you're going to be saying, oh yeah, but it boosts to 4.1, 4.2, but that's only on 4 of the cores, and you only need 1 weak core at 4 GHz, or let's say 4.025, so 4.25 gig. You only need 1 weak core, and you have to turn them all really back down again to be able to keep that, you know, level playing field. But 4 GHz, as you'll see, did rather well. So that's the trials and tribulations that we went through. What I will be doing, and it's something I wanted to do for launch, but because of AMD telling everyone, no, you've got to wait and all that sort of stuff, wanted to get a water block, but now I'm 100% going to get a water block. I know a lot of people have been asking questions about, you know, maybe the fact that the coolers have got quite a small die on them and the CPU is clearly bigger, but my problems were not the CPU and the CPU probe, you know, the actual CPU itself. That was not my problem. It seemed to be going on behind the CPU to the point where I'd almost wanted to get some thermal epoxy and put a water cooler on the back of the socket to try and cool that down as well. I mean, that's how warm it was getting. It's something that I've chuckled to myself about a couple of times, but I did nearly ruin an AIO cooler and bond it on. But the problem is I'd have to have ruined the board then, and I'd have to have got a new backplate for it. But I have asked Asus if I can have one so that I can give it a go. So that might be something a bit weird that you'll end up seeing in a later video. But anyway, we did get the overclock in, and it did really well. Really well in performance, and really well in drinking my electric as well. Now, we do need to remember that there are a lot more cores going on in this. There's another 6 cores to feed compared to the Intel, for example. That's, you know, more than half of a processor that's been nailed on the top. We don't need to worry about the threads so much because it's really just, you know, doubling up on the what you're feeding a single core. But nonetheless, there's another 6 cores there. So at stock, it was very thirsty, nearly 400 watts. Now you need to remember this was just with OCCT and in the normal LIN pack mode that we were doing this, but with that overclock in play, it went up to 600 291 watts. Now that's a CPU benchmark, and all the CPUs below have been tested in the same way. So when you kind of say it out loud, I mean, it's almost 5 times as thirsty as the overclocked, or as the normal Ryzen 5 1400 at stock. So it does drink a lot of power, but it's got a lot of processing power as well. And you also kind of need to remember, when you're running those sorts of benchmarks, it is really pushing the envelope of what's possible. Anyway, on to the performance, and this is all the stuff where you start, you get all chirpy and singing chimney and all that sort of stuff. We started doing our own custom blender recently, and we've got a 1080p version and a 4K version. There's 3 million polygons in the render. Now we've done this specifically because yes, it's going to pick out the men from the boys, but it's also the fact that this is something that is actually really quite stressful as well. But as you can see with this, it's a monster, because the Ryzen stuff is quicker than even an overclocked 7900X. That's an overclocked one, and the stock one beats it. If you overclock your Threadripper, I'd go as far as to say it decimates it. But anyway, so you can chew those numbers. They're all very recent numbers as well. Like every single one of those I have tested within the last month. So that is very recent. Then again, this is a recent game. And then we go on to Cinebench. Now Cinebench, everyone shouts about Cinebench because it is lovely and multi-threaded, and there's lots that you can take from a Cinebench run. Well, again, it just decimates it. Absolutely decimates it. It's the single-threaded stuff, the Intel does pull in front. Because the IPC is slightly better with the Intel stuff, and they're normally running at a higher clock speed with that as well. So single threaded, yes, give it cores to munch on, literally feed those threads and it's totally different. It swings back in the other way. That's one of the reasons why the XFR, with it being able to boost up quite high, is quite a good thing. One of the things I think they need to do is in the BIOS for the boards, I think they need to have a kind of a normal and a medium and a high XFR as well, so that it can go up and stay there longer, because it can be a bit laggy. But anyway, X265, it did very well in X265. Obviously this is encoding, so we've put this in there because you do get the Intel go back to the top with the overclock on this one, but the Threadripper holds strong at the top of the graph when you really think about it and think about all the numbers and stuff that are there. I've put this in for a bit of balance, because at the end of the day, gaming, if you were to buy a £1,000 processor for gaming and you understand what's going on with them, then if you're just going to game on it, then you've probably got too much money, and the results really don't back it up as a gaming thing. But then again, that's not really any different to what we were saying when Ryzen first came out either. And you do need to remember, this is Ryzen scaled up, because Ryzen was designed to be scaled. So if you thought it was going to be magically better than your 1800X, then maybe you need to go back and look at the reviews of, let's be totally frank about it, the 1200. Yes, the Ryzen 3 1200. I mean, when you look in these graphs, it's quite easy to see the mix in the pack, and there's not a great deal with them. And when it does come to the gaming performance, it does link in quite heavily to how quick the CPU was running. So the little baby 1200, I would say, is an absolute rocker. So when we move on, I've put this in to show you that it's not all woe when it does come to gaming. And with the 3D Mark stuff here, you can see that it's managed to top the graph, and then this with the overclock and the stock stuff has actually got quite an epic placement in there really as well. Okay then, so don't forget, I've given you all those results, but you can go and pick them apart and blow the graphs up and all that sort of stuff on the OC3D website. So my overwhelming opinion of Ryzen is Ryzen, what are you on about, Tom? Ryzen Threadripper, come on, we'll nail it on the end. My overwhelming impression of Threadripper is if you're using the programs that can utilize all those cores and threads, it is going to romp away and literally leave you with such a biggest smile. You'll think you've woken up after winning the lottery and woken up with a supermodel, and you've also then just won the lottery, because at the end of the day it is immensely fast. But you do need programs that are going to make the best of all those cores and threads. If you're just using normal stuff, or maybe even encoding the video in a way like WMV, or I know that's a dirty word, but using an encoder that is not going to sap all of those cores up, then it's not going to be worth the investment. But if you're one of those guys that really, you have programs that absolutely lap up all of those cores and threads, then you are going to be immensely happy. Overclocking wise, I'm going to go out on a limb and say if you want to overclock one of these properly, you know, have your overclock running all the time with a big overclock across and all the cores as well, I'm going to say that you're going to need water cooling, dedicated water cooling. The board has obviously got the water block header on the top. Now that's kind of a shame, because the board, even when I had it pulling 690 watts from the walls, those VRMs did not get hot. The heatsink on it is epic. The fan is a bit annoying, if I'm honest. When I wasn't doing the overclocking stuff, and you know, when I wasn't trying to make sure that heat was never going to be an issue, I actually turned that fan off because it was well annoying. It drove me crackers. And if you're running a sensible overclock, or you've got it at stock, you don't need it on either. You can turn it off. You will be fine. You can monitor it in hardware monitor if you're worried about it though. But big overclocks, you just want water on that core, and you're going to need to keep it cool. I'm going to keep looking at the temperatures on this and see if I can work out what that TCTL was all about, and see if I can manage to find ways to cool it and stuff. It's going to be a nice thing that we can kind of play around with each other as we're going forward. But at the end of the day, the CPU itself is an absolute barnstormer given the right use. And there's always going to be that kind of, you know, thing that you're going to pass off with it anyway, because as processors do get expensive, you need to make sure that you're giving it the right use. So we're going to give the CPU the OC3D Performance Award. The board itself is a weird one, because normally I prefer to do my reviews with the processors on a lower end board, so that then later on I can see how much better the big burly mega expensive boards are. So this is definitely a way that I'm not particularly comfortable about going away with it, yeah, you know what I mean. But this board has been absolutely faultless, bar that fan. They've got the design absolutely spot on. Let's face it, yes, it's an expensive CPU, but a lot of people would have been shying away from a over £500 product for a new AMD product anyway. So the fact that they've gone absolutely balls to the wall, this is basically, and people may not like my terminology with this, but the Zenith Extreme is basically the new Rampage for AMD. It's an absolute epic masterpiece, and it just goes to show what Asus can do. And the really annoying bit about it as well is this is before launch and it's this good, and I know it's only going to get better with BIOS as well. So the fact that they've absolutely kind of smashed it out the park, been really brave. I think the way it's going to be is that if you end up with the top end Threadripper, you're pretty much going to aspire to get this board, and I think it is going to be the absolute kind of cream of the crop. And I'm going to go out on a limb quite early as well. I think it's going to be the cream of the crop of the boards for a long time, and that is why that it deserves nothing less than the OC3D Enthusiast Award, because I think they've done an amazing job with everything they possibly could have done with it, and they've managed to churn that out with 4 Do you know what I mean? Normally boards like this, the way it normally happens, if you think about it, I know you don't like me talking about Intel, but the Rampage and the Apex for the X399 platform aren't out yet because they're still kind of, you know, working on it. This one's already out in time for NDA and it's epic. So yes, so there's 2 awards there. One of the things I will say, you know, because we do have to put a bit of balance in, Ryzen gaming is pretty much the same across all of the processors. It does come to overclocking. So if you're looking at this platform as something to put 4 graphics cards in, and you'd need to literally your box testing if you were doing that for gaming. But if you're going to be doing it for calculations and 3D modeling and all that kind of stuff, and literally just an epic compute system, then I will not call you nuts. I will call you, and this is a bit like something from Gone in 60 Seconds. So I would be a connoisseur. Anyway, some of you will get that, some of you won't. But that is pretty much what it comes down to. Now, I've properly enjoyed playing around with this. Something so new, so massive, so pushing boundaries. And props to AMD for keep pushing on with it as well. So this will not be the last you see of that Zenith board. It will not be the last you see of that processor either, because I've literally got a list of stuff that I now want to do and investigate and do a bit more testing on. So when I can do around the other reviews that I'm going to need to do, because I'm going to have other boards that I'm going to need to get reviewed, and I'm hoping to get other processors in as well that I'm going to be able to do. So it's going to be a proper interesting one. But to wrap up, good job AMD, good job.